Hello, this is Eastern Europe Review, the common project of BELSAT and TVP World, with reports and analysis from Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. I'm Alexandra Shapalina, and these are the main stories. Russia spends about $10 billion every month on the war against Ukraine, while many Russians live in extremely poor conditions.
If I were younger and a man, I would go to war in the first days too, because I fully support Putin.
Business is sacred. How does a Belarusian priest help the Lukashenka's regime bypass Western sanctions?
For Lukashenka's regime, Catholic believers, Catholic church buildings, and the Catholic Church are perceived as hostages that can be used in communication with the Vatican.
Putin's gold is at risk. How does the armed conflict in Sudan affect Russia's interest in Africa?
It's not just gold. Russian interests in Africa are very diverse.
According to independent economists, Russia spends about $10 billion every month on the war against Ukraine. The Russian President Vladimir Putin destroys towns and villages in a neighboring country, while in his own country, hundreds of thousands of people live in emergency housing without basic facilities. And surprisingly, people don't blame their president for anything. They are ready to take up arms and go to war even tomorrow, if needed.
I'm afraid. I'm very afraid. Well, if it collapses, 2 floors will fall on me.
This is Russian pensioner Galina Antonova. She lives in the Sverdlovsk region. The center of the region is the city of Yekaterinburg, the 4th largest city in the country in terms of population and territory. This woman lives in the small village of Tavatui with less than 400 inhabitants. The village is only 60 kilometers from the capital of the region, but the roads in this direction are very poor. It's more convenient to get there by train. Antonova's house was built in 1928. Now it is a complete emergency. Galina is especially scared at night when the building starts to crack. The walls are collapsing. The foundations are sinking. Many cracks are appearing in the house.
It cracks and breaks a little every day. New holes and cracks are appearing. We have to plug the holes and cover them up. Here, you see.
The situation is especially difficult in the winter, when icy wind is blowing through the large cracks in the walls. Even the stove, which has to be heated around the clock, doesn't help. The house has no sewage, no central heating, and no other utilities.
Here is the wash basin, where we wash our hands and collect water here. We never had running water.
Galina cannot carry water from a technical well in the street, as she is not healthy and she needs to rely on her neighbors. Galina's son used to help her, but he committed a crime, and after the trial he was put in prison. Now the woman hopes that recruiters from the Russian Ministry of Defense or the private military company Wagner will come to the prison. They recruit convicts for the war against Ukraine and promise them an amnesty.
If I were younger and a man, I would go to war in the first days too, because I fully support Putin. Thank God we haven't been bombed, because everything was done on time.
This is a house in Saratov, a city of almost 1 million inhabitants in southeastern European Russia. It's being destroyed without any bombing. The building was recognized as condemned property in 2018, and then the authorities promised to resettle the residents in 2 years' time. But people continue to live here today, despite the fact that bricks are falling on their heads.
Nothing. No one comes. Says nothing. We ask, when? They say, wait in a queue. Here we are waiting in a queue. At any moment, bricks may fall. They are falling from there. A bird flies there and the bricks fall.
The administration of the city of Saratov advised those who are afraid to live in such conditions to leave the house and find a new place on their own. Officials said that the demolition of the building has definitely not been planned until 2025. Due to the current times, there is no money in the budget for providing new apartments to people, as should be the case under the state federal program. Kaliningrad region, the most western region of Russia, enclave of Russia. Here, residents take care of the repair of their homes on their own. However, they encounter another problem here. There is no firewood to heat the dwellings. Brushwood from the forest and even old window frames are used instead.
My son brought us that to heat the place. He installs Euro windows and brings us the old ones.
It's difficult to buy coal for domestic use in one of the largest coal-producing countries in the world. Prices are rising literally every day, and the beggarly pensions of the elderly are simply not enough for this.
If last year we bought coal for 6,000 rubles per ton, $74, now consider that it has doubled in price.
I can't save up. I've been saving for 4 months to buy coal.
According to Forbes, Russia spent more than 114 billion a year on the war against Ukraine. That is about 10 billion a month. This is a third of all the revenue of the Russian budget. Moreover, this amount includes only the direct costs of military operations and doesn't take into account the economic and indirect losses incurred by Russia because of sanctions and economic isolation. At the same time, if we rely on official data, then the monthly costs of aggression against a neighboring state would be enough to resettle all emergency housing in Russia.
A Catholic priest helped businessmen close to the Belarusian regime to circumvent sanctions. A high-profile investigation has revealed the extent of cooperation between the Catholic Church and Lukashenka. After the presidential elections in 2020, the regime openly showed the church who is in power. The priests were arrested or expelled from the country, and the main church in the capital was closed for believers by the authorities. Could the regime force the Catholic Church to cooperate by oppressing priests and believers?
A scandal has erupted in the Belarusian Catholic Church. According to the Belarusian Investigative Center, a priest called Ihar Lashuk is helping businessmen close to Lukashenka to circumvent Western sanctions. For this purpose, he founded the Alisma company in 2021.
We have an extract from the Ministry of Justice of Belarus, from the Unified Register of Legal Entities, where it's indicated that Ihar Lashuk is the owner of the company Alisma, as well as the head of another legal entity connected with the Catholic Church.
Thus, a Catholic priest is the owner of a commercial company. Moreover, it seems that Alisma was created intentionally for the needs of another company, Bremino Group. The latter, as well as its 3 owners, businessmen Alexander Zaitsev, Alexei Aleksin, and Mykolai Vorobey, were sanctioned by the European Union in 2021. Soon, part of the property was signed over to the priest's company.
Warehouses and a transport terminal with 200 parking spaces were signed over to this company. It was issued a license for wholesale storage and trade in alcohol. After a year, in 2022, the company was granted the right by the State Customs Committee to impose an excise tax on alcohol and imported tobacco products.
There is nothing that would prevent Alisma, unlike Bremino Group, from importing goods from abroad and redirecting them to Russia.
It is one thing to appoint a random person as the nominee director, and another thing to appoint a priest of the Catholic Church. It won't be so easy to impose European sanctions on him. The Catholic Church can intercede for him, so it looks like quite a reliable scheme to bypass sanctions.
Ihar Lashuk is one of the most famous Catholic priests in the country, personally experienced both the pressure exerted by the KGB in Soviet times and the pressure of the current Belarusian authorities. That's why believers may be surprised by the photo in which he is presenting Alexander Zaitsev, who is close to Lukashenka, with the Pope's award, the Knight's Order of St. Gregory the Great. The priest commented on the investigation about his connections with the businessman on the website Catholic.life and revealed his practical approach to this.
They created a sensation. The priest helps to circumvent sanctions because he knows Mr. Alexander very well and speaks well of him. But how should I speak about a person who offers sincere help to the Catholic Church from the bottom of their heart?
Father Ihar's position can be explained by today's relations between the Catholic Church and Lukashenka's regime. The main interest of the Church here is to continue and preserve the possibility of spiritual activity, and the rules of the game are dictated by the authorities.
There was pressure even before the events of 2020, although it was not so obvious. But after the 2020 elections, Metropolitan Kandrusevich wasn't allowed into the country for very strange reasons. There were a number of arrests and prison terms for Catholic priests. And finally, in Minsk, the Red Church was closed for believers.
And this is only what is visible to the public. The dictator's interest in the Catholic Church is not only to intimidate it, it must also respond to Lukashenka's request, perhaps help circumvent sanctions, but most importantly, establish communication with the West through the Vatican.
For Lukashenka's regime, Catholic believers, Catholic church buildings, and the Catholic Church are perceived as hostages that can be used in communication with the Vatican.
The Vatican, in turn, is interested in maintaining conditions for Catholic believers in the country, and despite everything, it continues to keep relations with Lukashenka's regime. However, for the time being, Vatican diplomacy is putting the Catholic Church in Belarus in an even more precarious position.
Libya, the Central African Republic, Zimbabwe, Burkina Faso, and of course Sudan. What's the connection between all these countries and Russia? Wagner, a private military company, gold, diamonds, and weapons. Russia's predatory interests are quite broad. The outbreak of the armed conflict between the two rulers in Sudan may have a financial impact on Russia, as now its gold appears to be under threat. How did it happen that Russia made an investment in Africa, and why is Sudan so important to it?
Putin's gold is under threat. The war between the ruling clans in Sudan may prevent Russia from causing environmental degradation in a foreign country by mining the usual amounts of gold.
This one is a gold.
It's not just gold. Russian interests in Africa are very diverse. This expansion has been going on for quite a long time, and of course, to a greater extent, it concerns minerals. And here, of course, gold is one of the most important resources for Russia's interest in stabilizing its currency after sanctions were imposed.
Russia has been mining gold in Sudan since 2017, about 30 tons annually. Former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir let Putin into the African country. Now, Russia is doing business with the commander of the Rapid Support Forces, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who is also known as Hemeti.
They have some support from pro-Russian forces, from Ethiopia with its interest in weakening Sudan because they've had a border conflict during the last 2 years. Well, and also the support from the United Arab Emirates.
The pro-Russian forces are the Wagner PMC, owned by a Russian businessman, Yevgeny Prigozhin. They provide security services for gold and diamond mines in Libya, the Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, and of course in Sudan. Additionally, Wagner PMC supplies Africa with weapons. Lukashenka's regime does the same, as they have mines in Sudan and Zimbabwe. The Belarusian Investigative Center claims that Sudan has been one of the largest buyers of Belarusian weapons. Belarus was allowed into Sudan by the same person, Omar al-Bashir. Both Lukashenka and Putin met with him personally. According to CNN, Russia continues to supply Sudan with weapons thanks to Hemeti. It might be Russia who stands behind an attempted coup d'etat.
If Hemeti loses, and it turns out that the Russians supported him, then there is a chance that the power that Burhan will take, and possibly the power of civilians, all these will have consequences for Russia. But I would not be so optimistic here, because as I said earlier, the Russians have been trying to play it safe and keep in touch with Burhan.
Burhan is not fond of Russia, fearing for his own power. But the fact is that Russia does not care with whom it does business. The main concern is that the privilege of duty-free gold mining is not taken away from it. Russia has also eventually received permission to build a military base on the Red Sea. This will allow it to control one of the most important crossroads on the world's shipping routes, the entrance to the Suez Canal and the exit to the Indian Ocean. In exchange, Sudan will receive even more weapons as well as boost for the economy coming from the exploitation of deposits and the mercenaries who are ready to enter any bitter conflict if needed.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Eastern Europe Review. We will be back next week with new stories. I'm Alexandra Shapalina. Keep watching TVP World and see you next time.